Hello, everybody. I am Julia Mahoney. I am the Educational Program Administrator for Renew Theaters. I want to welcome our members of the Ambler, the County, the Princeton Garden, and the Highway Theaters, as well as the Majestic in Gettysburg, which is partnering with us this fall. Programs like this are possible due to the Vesta Fund, which has given us a grant for our online seminar series, Deep Focus. So tonight we will be discussing the Lulu Wang film, The Farewell, led by Columbia professor Ngai, as the third talk in our Asian American film series, which is guest curated by Princeton professor Ann Chang. But before we get to that, I just want to talk to you about two upcoming events that we also have happening. So 1 week from today, we will have a talk on a German film, which is a film in the style of a Western drama, and that is called The Dark Valley. So you can rent that on Amazon or the Apple Store, and then join us next Monday for that chat. Also, in a little bit, on Tuesday, December 7th, we will have a talk on the Afghan film Osama as part of our Middle Eastern cinema series, which can be streamed via Amazon or on Canopy. And you can always find out more information about past and upcoming talks on our website, deepfocus.film. So I just want to talk for a minute about Zoom protocol. So we do request that everybody remains on mute unless they are speaking. We will start with a talk led by May and then open it up to discussion. We ask that if you have a question or comment to please use the raise hand feature. That way we don't end up talking over each other and we can call on speakers. But as the conversation gets going, feel free, we will be able to respond to one another when it opens up a little bit more. And I also want to encourage you to use the chat feature to discuss anything related to the film. So we can bring anything in from the chat as a little sidebar to our bigger discussion as well. So our speaker for tonight is May Ngai. May is Lung Family Professor of Asian American Studies, a professor of history, and co-director of the Center for the Studies of Ethnicity and Race at Columbia University. She's the author of many books and writes on immigration history and policy for the Washington Post, the New York Times, The Nation, and Dissent. Most recently, she wrote on the history of anti-Asian American violence for The Atlantic. She is now working on a book called Nation of Immigrants, a short story of an idea. So please join me in welcoming May Ngai.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to Professor Ann Chang for extending this invitation. It was a lovely opportunity to see this film again, and I'm delighted to be here with you this evening. So as I said, I love this film. It's bittersweet, it's both sad and funny. And I look at it as a story about what it means to be a transnational Chinese family in our time, and how there are different ideas about love, what love means, and what obligations mean. I love Awkwafina as Billie, even with her bad Mandarin accent. I read that she memorized her lines phonetically because she doesn't speak Mandarin. Now that accent might be plausible for a Chinese American who grew up in America, like Awkwafina, although Billie did live in China until the age of 6, so I think she would have had a natural accent, but that's a very minor point. The women in this film are the strong characters, not Billie, Ngai, of course, her sister, and her daughter-in-law, Billie's mother, who I find a particularly difficult character, but I really felt like you had to feel for her. I just want to touch on two themes that struck me, and I think that the director wanted us to think about. And I think that Lulu Wang handled with a special subtlety and grace. One is the separation of families, what that means for transnational Chinese families, and the whole question of hiding medical information from elders. Now, on the question of separation of families, I had remembered the film wrong. I thought Billie had been born in the United States, taken back to China and raised by her nana, and then went back to the United States. And actually in the movie, it says her whole family moved when she was 6. But her relationship to her grandma reminds me of this phenomenon, which is actually quite common in the last several decades among Chinese immigrant families, which is that a young couple will immigrate. They will have a child in the United States. So that child is an American citizen. But then for various reasons, the couple decides that it's really hard for them to raise the child when they're trying to get established. So they send the kid back to China, and the kid is raised by the grandparents until they're school age, and then they're sent back to the United States to go to school. And I think that the reasons for this are understandable in terms of the difficulties that immigrants face when they first come to the United States. And it's understandable because childcare is expensive and the grandparents are kind of natural caretakers and caregivers. But I think for the children, it's really, really hard because they have two separation traumas, right? The first is when they're separated from their parents and sent back to their grandparents. And the second is when they're separated from the grandparents and sent back to their parents, right? The grandparents that they've become close to. And so I think that this is a really difficult thing, and it's actually fairly common. I know a lot of people in this situation, including some members of my own family. So the sociologists have a name for this. They call it satellite kids, which I don't exactly get. I think they want to distinguish them from the parachute kids, which are the kids that are just kind of dropped into America to go to high school and college. So Billie's not a satellite kid, but she does suffer from her separation from her Ngai and yeah, and also the other people who suffer in this scenario are Billie's parents, and their suffering is not that clear. It's not that explicit, but obviously their silent suffering, because it's largely silent, also has a tremendous effect on Billie as a child when she has that outburst with her mother and she says, I never knew anything that was going on. You guys never told me anything. All I saw was how afraid you were, how scared you were in your eyes. I didn't know anything that was going on. So here's this 6-year-old child uprooted from her grandmother's and grandfather's love and care, and brought to America, a strange country. And her parents, like many Chinese parents, don't tell you anything. They don't explain anything to you about what's going on, right? And Anne is laughing because we all know how our parents never tell us anything. So that's the first comment I want to make. And I think that this is, I think this question was handled very subtly and nicely in the movie. And I think it's a difficult social problem, but it's something that affects a lot of families. And the second thing I'll just comment on briefly, and then we can have a discussion, is this whole problem: what do you tell your elders, right, when they're gravely ill? This is also very common among Chinese families. I know a lot of families that do this. My own family did it a little bit, also. But it's not only not telling them about their own grave medical condition, but it's also they don't want to tell you about other people who've died, right? So suddenly there are family members who may not live in your town, but they say things like, oh, she's too busy to come visit, right? Actually, whoever that she is dead, right? But they make up stories about, what's going on with these other family members because they don't want to tell somebody that somebody's gone. And I think this is another part of this syndrome, if I could call it that, of not telling people. And so I think for those of us who, grew up in or live in America, this strikes us, and as it strikes Billie, as a horrible thing because we think people have a right to know, right? And yet I think the film suggests that Ngai actually really knows. And she's playing along. So everybody lives in the grace of what's not said. Everybody can pretend, including Ngai, right? And so the family can pretend that everything's fine and they don't tell her. And Ngai can pretend that everything's fine because she doesn't want them to worry. And she can act like everything's fine, but actually everybody knows. So I don't know which is better. Who's to say? I don't have an opinion as to what's better. And I think Billie softens her own view, towards the end of the movie. So anyway, those are my comments. I think that these are questions that many of Chinese American families deal with. I don't know how non-Chinese think about these questions, right? But I think they're actually quite common in our present day community and among transnational families. So I'll end it there, and I look forward to your comments and questions, etc.
Thank you, May. I do want to encourage everybody to turn their cameras on so we can all see each other at this point during the discussion. But if you have a comment or a question, now's the time to use that raise hand feature. And you can also just jump in, Anne.
All right, thank you. I'm laughing because I'm always inordinately proud of myself for being able to do things like use the raise hand function correctly. Anyway, but thank you, May. That was such a, it's so evocative, just everything. Say hi, Nancy. I see a friend of mine. So I love to hear other people, talk about this question of what you said earlier about love and duty. So the thing about, I think you're totally right. Like, it's actually not clear what's better, the not telling or what I think of, which people can correct me, but what I think of as the American way, which is you always tell the truth, right? You tell everybody everything. The Chinese is like opposite, the not telling. But I was thinking about how the open secret in the movie, that I agree, I think Ngai knows. And she enables this sort of grace to happen. But also, I also, like, from a personal point of view, felt the burden. There's a really touching moment in the movie where I can't remember if it was the father or the mother who was explaining to Billie that, we don't tell her because we are bearing the burden of this news for her. It is our job as her children to bear this burden for her. And it's a genuine, very moving gesture, right? I don't think it's I think it's, but at the same time, I was just remembering, when I was a child growing up in Taiwan, the ways in which this sort of grace that everybody has is also a kind of, it's a burden in its upkeep, right? Like, it's, like, everybody's working really hard to show other people that they're fine.
Right.
And it's so much work. And it also means that you don't ever get, like, one of the things that's frustrating for me about my relationship with my mother, for example, is that I can never tell what she really wants.
Right, but you have to read her mind.
Because everything is always, like let's say she comes to visit and I offer, we live in Princeton, New Jersey, and I offer to take her to New York, which is, an hour away. And she says, no, it's too much trouble. You're busy. I don't want to put you out. And I'm like, well, I'm happy to go to New York. It's not that far. But the truth is, I would only take her if she wants to go. But I could never tell if she does or doesn't. So it takes a lot of me saying, no, I'd be happy to go. And her saying, no, I don't want to go. And then eventually she's like, oh, it might be fun. So
you have to say, I have to go to the city to take care of some things. And will you come with me? Will you come with me so you can help me park the car? You have to make it so she's doing you a favor.
Yeah, but I think my observation is that like, love in the Chinese context has a lot to do with responsibility, and that responsibility in turn means a great deal of I don't know what to call it, like psychological maintenance on behalf of other people.
Right, yeah. Valerie, you have your hand up. Yeah.
I almost don't want my camera on because I got a neck thing going on here and the whole bit. So I apologize for how I look. Excuse me. I love this film. I loved it a lot. It was eye-opening as far as Chinese culture. But I have to say, I was mostly drawn by the universality of it. All I could think of was my Italian American grandma the whole time, how she ruled the roost. Everything revolved around my grandma and what she said and what she did. And many people in my own family, as I see in the chat, someone wrote, like, I'm thinking of my Polish American mother-in-law who hid her cancer from us for quite a while to spare us. And we wanted to know what was going on so we could be there for her, but they kept it quiet. So I think there's a universality to that. I think it's people, that's how some people are. And I guess in different cultures it expresses itself in different ways. But I was drawn to this film. I thought it was beautifully done. I was glad to see that Nene really survived and kept on going after the diagnosis, or what they thought was the diagnosis. And like I said, I just kept thinking of my own grandmom, who's not Chinese, but is a grandmom. And I think grandmom is grandmom, kind of, Anyway, that's enough from me.
Thank you.
And Valerie mentioned we have a connection in the chat from Nancy saying she knows that American families also sometimes hide bad news to be kind to elder relatives. So it's maybe not just a thing for Asian American families, but maybe it's done.
Well, it picks up on Valerie's point of, depending on the family, there can be a real universality to it. And I think I think as time goes on, we need to be more careful about what is being Chinese, because there's so many different types of Chinese now. And as time goes on, the experiences of people who were born and raised in mainland China, who then come over as graduate students, their experiences as they become Asian Americans is going to be very different from the Asian American who was born in Brooklyn, right, and raised in Manhattan, or the Asian American who came over as a young child, who still has ties to the past. I mean, my mother came over as a graduate student in 1949. It wasn't the last boat out of Shanghai, it was one of the boats out of Hong Kong, and came to the United States as a graduate student. And until she died in her 80s, she still referred to home as her hometown back in China. And she'd been in this country for more years than she had been in China, right? But the sense of home and her ties to relatives just never ended. So it's just very interesting, all the different family views of this. And I still have not seen The Farewell. There were enough, write-ups about it. I know. There were enough write-ups about it being a tearjerker that I said, I'm going to listen to May and Anne talk about this movie. And if it sounds fascinating enough, then I will watch it. But generally, I avoid it because I just sob at them. It's just awful. So, but anyway, sounds good. I may very well watch it afterwards. Keep going.
I think Alan has his hand up.
Alan.
You're on mute, Alan.
Yeah, I had to unmute. Sorry. I wanted to give you, May, a chance to respond to Nancy if you wanted to, but thank you for calling on me. I grew up in a second generation Russian, Polish, Jewish home in New York City. And I have to say, we were an exception to this suffering in silence nobility. We did not do that. There was suffering in silence was foreign to us. But what we had instead was sarcasm and humor. That was how we got through any tragedy, and by tragedy, things like cancer, for instance. The word cancer was always whispered. It was never said with any volume. And other things like diabetes. Diabetes was that we shouted as an accusation. Interesting to think about the way different immigrant cultures or transnational cultures embody these family hurdles. But enough about me. I wanted to be here tonight because I've seen this movie 4 times. It was pretty much my favorite movie in 2019, and it might have been the last movie I saw before COVID set in. But I love it. I love it. And part of what I love about it the most is that despite the fact that this movie is about silence and secret, every scene is imbued with deep emotion, not always pain, but the communication. We always know what those characters are feeling, even if they're not saying it. And I just don't see many movies that privilege, the inner life of human beings in relationship with their family members in the way this movie did. It really It really broke my heart in the best way possible. And just for fun, I have to say my favorite character was the mother. She had the best lines. I mean, how did you want me to say it? Grandma's on the roof? I mean, it just doesn't get better than that. It was just perfect. And Nancy, I don't want to spoil anything for you, but I hope you see this movie as soon as possible, because it's just wonderful.
Thank you, Alan. I will.
I'm sorry
Yeah,
there
I
wasn't.
think,
There.
I think the mother, I mean, I mentioned the mother also. I mean, she's not a central character, but I think she's really important in terms of the role of the daughter-in-law, you know, which is difficult, right? The respect she has to show to her husband's mother, and you know, she's very bitter. You know, she's bitter about the burdens that she's carried, about the suffering that they've had, and she's like, I can't cry. I don't have time to cry. You know, I don't have whatever the wherewithal to cry. So she's very hard on herself, and that's why she's hard on Billie. She's hard on everybody around her.
Mhm.
And I found her really, you know, I really felt there was a lot going on with her that is hard to explain, but I thought she conveyed a kind of silent immigrant suffering.
Yeah, I also thought there was like in that dining, there's one of the dining scenes where for the siblings are talking, and you could just hear this complex relationship of
Right,
guilt,
right.
you know, of guilt and accusation, you know, like, well, you didn't come home for a really long
Right, right.
time. I'm the one here. And,
Right.
you know, just on both sides, right? You see the grievance on both sides all around the table. And it was, yeah, you know, as Alan said, it was really a beautiful movie in the ways in which it contained all these different emotions from the different characters that are actually just sometimes, you know, rarely articulate, but always sort of simmering, and you can feel it.
Right.
Picking up on what Alan said about the humor, May, I wonder if you had anything to say to like Awkwafina's casting, since she is, I know you said you loved her, but she is famous as a comedian. She's famous as this like really funny character in Crazy Rich Asians. She played like a hilarious character. And this is, she still gets to be funny. I think the humor is important in the movie, but she has to balance the dramatic role a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, this was a dramatic role for her. It was a change, and I think she did a good job with it. You know, she's I think it was refreshing to see her attempt something different, and I think she did it well. You know, when she's walking with her uncle down the street to go to the hotel, and she says, "We're Zhidao, we're Zhidao, we're Zhidao," you know. I know, you know, he's telling her what to do and what not to do. That was great. That was a great scene. So I really appreciated, you know, what she did with a dramatic role. I haven't seen her new thing, like Nora from Queens. I don't know if anybody else has. I haven't seen it. I wonder how she's doing now.
You know, she's such an incredible actress, actually, because I was thinking about, you know, I don't know how many people saw this, but she was in Jumanji, the live action version of
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And she basically played, you know, because like when they fall into the game, they become somebody else, right?
Right,
she
right.
basically played, was it Danny DeVito? And she was great. She was like this Chinese girl who's Danny DeVito. It was very impressive.
And if you watch her early music videos, they are, you know, like My Vag. Has anybody seen My Vag? It's her rap song. It's about her vag, you know. She's something else. So anyway, yeah. Has anybody seen her TV, that Nora from Queens? Has anybody seen that? How is it?
Alan?
I don't think I'm the target audience for it. It skews a bit young for me. You know, a lot of the plot lines are about her vag. and
Oh, the
her
badge is back.
and her inability to just get anything going. So she's kind of a bit of a sad sack, and it's fun, but you know, she's good. Bowen Yang is great. Billie Wang as her father is terrific.
Oh,
And you know, there's lots to like in it, but on the whole, it's a little too abrasive for me. But you know, but I wish her the best. I want her to have as successful a career as is absolutely possible, because I think she's wonderful. Does anyone else feel differently, or has anyone else seen it?
I think it's good. I think it's a lot of like, just like semi-autobiographical stuff that come to expect from her, but it fits her well, and everyone else is great. Bowen Yang is in it, and he's also good. I like him a lot.
Yeah, they're all clearly having a lot of fun, and that shows. Getting back to the movie, one of the other things I really loved was her performance, because she's playing it so soberly. You know, her resting face is just sad and yearning. I mean, her character is living this very unconnected life in New York City. You know, she can't pay her rent, and you know, she's not getting the grants she wants, and just nothing's quite working out. And the thing that kind of saves her is her connection to her family and her grandmother in particular. And there's that wonderful moment that you know is going to pay off in the end. Nancy, you're going to have to put your fingers in your ear for just a second. That when her grandmother teaches her how to voice her guts, how to scream with you know, with heart. And that's for me the soul of the movie.
yeah. Nai's not exactly doing Tai Chi,
Right.
but that voice, that's a Tai Chi move, right? With the voice, with the yell, right?
So I actually love Awkwafina as well, as you know from what I've said. But can I say something grumpy, which is this going to be the case now that she is the Asian American actress? Like if there's going to be an Asian American actress, it's going to be Awkwafina. Is that a thing? I mean, I just feel like we're in 2021, and it's still the same phenomenon of like they're just like a handful, maybe less than a handful of Asian American actors and actresses, and they're going to be the one that we see over and over again. I'm just being grumpy. Am I being grumpy, May?
Well, I think there's a bigger issue, which is, you know, after Crazy Rich Asian, it was like, oh, it's all open up now, right? Now we can have Asian American films with Asian American characters and Asian American actors. And at Columbia, we had a big program on Crazy Rich Asians with a lot of very smart people, you know, like David Henry Hwang and, you know, others. And one of the things that people said at the time, which is, you know, I mean, because obviously there's a lot of criticism you could make of that movie. And one of the points I think that we all felt was that it's too big a burden for one movie to carry for the whole, you know, the whole race, right? Basically, I mean, one movie cannot represent all of us, right? And you have to have many movies, and you have to have good movies and bad movies, right? And a range of actors. And that is not actually really happening, right? And I have been, I'll maybe talking at a school, but I have been working with a young filmmaker who's been trying to get this book I wrote, The Lucky Ones, picked up as a film, and nobody's interested. I mean, I don't really have a big investment in this, but I think what's interesting is that, and I've talked to people who are very, very experienced and high level writers and film, you know, showrunners and writers, and they can't shop their stuff right now either. And so there's an opening, and yet Hollywood or Netflix or whoever, they want a certain kind of movie. They don't really want a serious movie. I think The Farewell was an exception in that regard, because it's funny, but it's a serious movie. And so I think the problem is a bigger one than, is it just going to be one movie star? I think the problem is, is there a genre called Asian American film? And what is it? And is stuff going to get made? What's going to get made? I mean, what else is there out there since The Farewell? Besides the action stuff.
There's Minari.
Minami, right.
Which
Yeah,
by the
right.
way, won the best foreign film, even though it's not a foreign film.
Right. And
Minari is
actually,
great.
yeah, I mean, I thought it was the slowest thing I'd seen in years, but that's just me. That's just me.
I actually loved it. But because I think it is, I mean, it's not, and that's actually one of the movies in the series.
Right.
But it's it's not action, but it's full. I think I loved it because I thought it was full of really painful,
Right.
interpersonal family stuff. It's a film about how we're meanest to the people that we love, and etc. It's just, it's kind of intense.
Yeah, that's true. Right. And there's another great Ngai in that movie too. The grandma, who's fabulous as well. Right. But so we're talking about 3 movies in 5 years and 3 years. I mean, that's not a lot. I believe Pachinko is being made into a series for some cable platform. And Min Jin Lee walked away from that because they changed the story. She walked away from it, and it was half done. So I think that this whole question of what it means to make Asian American film, the kind of power that the studios or the streaming platforms have still over content, I think this is something we're gonna be wrestling with for a while.
You guys know about, and I haven't seen the movie, but I saw the preview and I noticed this, which is, the film version of Little Fires Everywhere, novel by Celeste Ng. The Asian Americans became African Americans in the movie. Did you notice that? Like, it's just like this, it's like a racial substitution that happened. I don't know.
Really?
Yeah,
I read the book, but I haven't seen the movie.
Yeah,
I haven't seen the movie. Yeah.
I don't know what Celeste Ng thought about that, but I wouldn't be surprised if she walked away from it either.
Yeah, and actually her other book is along the theme that we've been talking about, All the Things I Never Told You. That's a very painful book about a Chinese American family where nobody talks, nobody says anything, nobody talks about what's going on, and it ends up with a lot of tragic consequences.
There are a couple of comments in the chat talking about Chloe Zhao, who did Eternals and Nomadland, which are films not as focused on the Asian American experience, but there is, I believe, an Asian American actress in the Eternals. But I see Sarah, so I'm gonna pass it over to her.
All right. Hi, can you guys hear me? All right, cool. I have a couple of questions going back to this film, and but just to explain before I ask the questions, I am Portuguese originally, so I came to the US as an adult already. And when I watch Portuguese films, say with American friends or Portuguese spoken films, I feel like my experience is very different from theirs because I know the language and I understand a lot of things that they don't understand from their perspective. So it's very interesting. And as I was watching this film, I was wondering if I was missing some things that maybe for a natural speaker would be obvious. And then for me, it was just totally, passing by. So I was wondering if there's anything like that you feel like someone like me could maybe miss in this movie. So that was one thing. And then maybe related to that, I think it was interesting that you're saying that it was obvious to you guys that the grandmother knew what was going on. I mean, I guess it's hinted in the film because she did the same thing with her father and so forth. And so it's expected that that's what people do. And in that case, I think it's interesting because when there's an attitude, a cultural attitude that everyone kind of participates in, the whole moral issue of whether we should tell her the truth or not disappears, because it's not. I mean, everyone's doing the same game. The problem is with other people from the outside, or in this case, the granddaughter doesn't understand what's going on completely, or doesn't understand it, or thinks that, she has the outsider perspective. But when everyone's kind of in it together, it doesn't seem like there's a moral issue. I think it's interesting. And I'm thinking, I teach film and philosophy. And so I'm thinking of using this film in talking about cultural relativism, because I kind of think it exemplifies that really well, where there seems at the surface, there seems to be a moral issue. But then when you look deeper into it, maybe we're all like, all we want to do is take care of our elders and, help them go through these difficult times and with the family and everything. And it just expresses itself differently in different cultures, like you guys were saying in the beginning, but it's not like a real hard difference, if that makes sense. So I was wondering, like, these two things probably relate to each other, because to me, it wasn't, when I was watching, it wasn't completely obvious. I mean, it was hinted, but I wasn't completely obvious that the grandmother knew what was going on. So, and for you, it was obvious. So I'm like, I don't know. Yeah.
I don't think it's obvious in the film. I think it's pretty subtle. And I didn't really think about it until, I don't know, halfway through. But I think but it's not like everybody's in on it together either, right? Like the family actually does think that they're keeping it from her. And so they're making a kind of moral decision to keep it from her. I don't think the family,
I'm wondering
some of them sort of know, but I don't, it's all very convoluted, right? Like Anne said, like, what do people really think and what do they say? It's not, there's so much indirection in what they say to each other and then their relationships, that it's very complicated. And I think the film does a good job of showing us how complicated it is without passing judgment on people. But I don't think it's that they're all in it together.
Yeah, and I think I actually think the answer to both questions are related, which is to say, I think that you're right, that when everyone's in the same social view, there's no moral issue. But there is a moral issue in the movie, and it was introduced not by an outsider, but by the insider who's an outsider, right? By Billie, right? The Billie character. And then, because and that's where the heart of the movie is at, right? It's the question of what it means to be a transnational subject. And so she's the outsider who's also the insider. Now, having said that, the thing that I think one can hear in the movie, if you are a Chinese speaker, is what May said earlier, right? Which is that Billie speaks Mandarin very poorly, right? And very awkwardly. She has a very, it's not just about vocabulary, her accent is bad. And when you can hear that, it underscores her outsider insider status. Right. And so, yeah, so I actually think that, anyway.
So that ends up working towards the performance instead of against it, right? Because that, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, interesting.
Is Hao's accent, his Chinese accent bad at all? Because I know he lives in Japan with his parents.
He barely speaks.
Yeah, that's true. They both get made fun of by their like aunts and uncles for not being able to speak Chinese well, and they're always super quiet. William.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the ethical questions around the secret keeping, and I didn't watch the film right before this, so I think I'm remembering this properly though. But if it seems to be a largely autobiographical, kind of an auto-fiction film, and that often raises interesting ethical issues. And the grandmother is still alive, as we learn at the very end, and it's centered around this never revealed secret. I just wonder what did the grandmother see the film? I mean, that was kind of one of my questions after finishing watching it, and like all the additional issues that raised. I wonder what people thought about that.
I actually tried to research that question about Lulu, because it is about Lulu Wang's family and her own Nai. And what I read on the internet, because we all know everything we read on the internet is true, right? What I read is that the grandma knew they were making a movie. When she asked what it was about, they were very vague in what they told her. They said things like, oh, it's about family and about conflicts, something really vague, which was not untrue, but really didn't tell the Nai what the movie was about. And then she says she doesn't think she's seen it, the movie, because I guess she's elderly. She doesn't really know how to go on the internet and find a movie. So she doesn't think she's even seen it. But maybe she has, as part of this whole kind of double life that people lead.
That's interesting because it says like based on a real lie. So then
Right,
are we, if she hasn't seen it, are we as audience members, complicit in keeping up this lie? But then as Sarah was talking about, like the morality there, it's not our place to say anything. We're kind of in on this lie together, which does feel a little uncomfortable.
I really love the weddings scenes when they all get drunk and they play the chicken game, and it's when Billie kind of realizes that kind of just joy of being with one's family and having fun and doing, playing a dumb game around a table when you're drunk, that might not have been possible if there was an open acknowledgement, that Nai was terminally ill. And that's when Billie kind of has that recognition, and her she becomes more ambiguous, right? More ambivalent about what it means to not tell her. But I thought that was so well done, that that whole wedding. I've seen weddings like that in China. I haven't been in one, but I've seen that. And it was pretty good depiction of a kind of crazy Chinese wedding. Where people show up in t-shirts and sneakers, and you have these ridiculous performers, and they don't want to serve you lobster even though you ordered it. It's all very relatable. But that was the scene, right, where Billie realizes that they're really having a joyous occasion, even if that marriage itself is weird, right? But they're all really having fun together, and that had a lot of meaning for her.
That kind of reminded me of oh, what was it called? The Wedding Banquet.
Yeah,
You guys
right.
seen The Wedding Banquet? And at the end, there's a scene where the parents are finally leaving, which should be a source of great relief for everybody, right? Because it was such a burden having the parents there and lying and all that stuff. And yet everyone's sad, right, at the airport. And then there's a scene at the end where they're crowded around the table and they were looking at the wedding album, which is completely posed, right? Because it's actually a fake wedding. And, for those who have seen the movie, it's a complete, and yet nonetheless, the family cohered around the photo, the stage photo of the wedding, and they laugh about it, and they were actually united in that lie. And that sort of like reminds me of the same kind of thing where, there's a way in which families, not to take away the authenticity of families, but that sometimes families work because it can uphold an image of itself to itself. And sometimes that image is enough, even if the image is false or staged or postured, or, so it's a kind of, it's interesting. I mean, I think that, May is totally right that they couldn't have had that happy wedding without the lie. So, it's a genuine happy moment, even if it's based on lie. But it's also a kind of a moment. But at the same time, it also reminds me of the ways in which families are a kind of ideal, that people uphold. And it stays up because you hold it up. You maintain it. You know?
Well, I think the sense of a successful family or successful relationships is has a positive feedback loop for people, right? It makes them feel connected, and it also affirms that they're doing something right. Even if when you think about it really hard, there's some kind of squirrely aspects to it. But if you can kind of ignore them, the positive side is actually pretty neat. Let's go back to humor for a second. Alan's point about humor in his family. May, talk a little bit about humor, you know, what you saw in the movie. I'm going to accept spoilers, Alan, so don't fuss. Let May talk about humor in the movie and also humor in terms of Chinese families, because I'll tell you right now, in my family, there was very little humor. You know, my father and mother, they read the newspapers, life was very literal. There were no jokes told in my family. We would hear jokes when other friends came to visit, but my parents were very serious scholars. You know, humor was sort of a waste of time.
I think at one level, my family was like that too. You know, my parents also came in the late 40s, you know, after the war, for postgraduate training, and very serious. But they could be funny, maybe inadvertently funny. They could be pretty funny, or we thought they could be funny anyway. I think in the film there's like Billie's father wants to kind of be the jovial jokester guy, like he tells the jokes about being on the roof, you know. So, but he's actually very sad. You know, he's actually really sad, and we don't explore it that much. I think what's funny in the movie are these moments of recognition, you know, when people tell a million lies in this movie. Like in the opening scene, Billie's talking to her Ngai on her cell phone, and Nai's in the hospital waiting for her CAT scan results. And so you hear the PA system behind her, and Billie's like, "Where are you? What's that noise? Where are you?" And so she lies and tells her, I don't know where she says she is, you know, but she's never would say she's in the hospital or she's waiting for a test result, right? And so there are these, I think there's a lot of these little moments in the film where people tell little lies to just get through the moment, and they're kind of funny, you know, like, you know, the grandma having to scramble for some explanation about where she is, right? Or she tells Billie on the phone, "It must be cold, you know, wear your hat." And Billie says, "I'm wearing a hat." But then we see that she's not wearing a hat, right? She's walking in New York without a hat, but she tells her, "Nai, you know, dial Maozi," right? So it's those little moments where people tell little white lies to keep their relationships going. And a lot of that is where I think that's one area where there's a kind of ongoing humor in the movie. And some of the scenes are just funny, like the wedding is hilarious, right? The wedding is a caricature of a kind of, you know, wedding where people in China now have enough money that they can throw a big wedding like this, but it's also kind of crass, you know. And so there's a lot of, I think Lulu Wang has a good eye for the absurd in the everyday. And there's something about this movie that reminded me of Gish Jen's writing, which I also relate to a lot because I come from the kind of same social background and upbringing and time. And so Gish has this way, especially in her earlier books, of narrating a family story that's it resonates, and then something goes crazy, right? Like something goes crazy in her books. And so I felt that The Farewell had a little bit of that element. where it's all kind of very relatable on one level, and then things kind of go nuts. And I think that's part of the genius of the storyteller, right? How they bring you in and you can relate, and then it kind of goes crazy.
Yeah, I think there's also some really funny moments where I think the director is really smart about this, where she's really good at sort of delineating different levels of awareness. So for example, a really funny scene for me was when Billie shows up in China, and she was going to her hotel room, and the bellboy was bringing her luggage up, and she kept trying to close the door because she's tired, and he kept asking her questions about America, like
Yeah, right.
I remember that. And,
Which is better, China or America? Right?
Yeah, and she's like, well, different. And he's like, well, which is better? She said, well, different. And there was something I thought it was a super funny scene. It's because why was that funny? I guess it's partially because of the different the different realities of the characters. The guy's eager to hear about America, she's wary, and so oftentimes when characters have different kind of realities going on at the same time, you get a funny scene.
Alan, I think I saw you, and then we'll go to Sarah after.
Yeah, a lot of the warmth and humor in this film, now that I'm remembering it, comes specifically from the grandmother's relationship with Billie. And I want to call her the Ngai, but I'm afraid I won't say it correctly and I'll just sound like an idiot. So I'm going to call her the grandmother.
No, your Ngai is fine.
Oh, okay.
You got your Ngai.
But anyone who was lucky enough to have a loving grandmother in their life will recognize so many of those emotional but embarrassing impulses. I mean, the scene in the hospital where she tries to fix Billie up with the young, handsome doctor, like that's, every grandma in the world would do that. And there's also in the kitchen all those little jokes about Billie's butt and the shape of her butt, and I'll always know you by your butt. I mean, anyone who's had a grandmother had their cheek pinched or their butt pinched or their hair pulled, something like that. And of course, trying to get, how many meat pies do you want? 12, 20? And she's like, well, maybe 6, 7. She goes, no, that's not enough. All of that is just so, grandma.
Well, that was her mom, but that was perfect.
Oh, that was her mom. That's
yeah,
right.
But that was so perfect. It's like, how many wonton do you want? And she goes, well, 5. She goes, that's not enough. So she said 12. That's too many. Yeah. 10 is the right number, which is true. 10 is the correct number.
Yeah. But in my family, again, just slightly different. The humor was not an expression. It was almost a contact sport. It was anything that could be made fun of, anything that could be complained about and made fun of. That was the goal. That was our experience. We came from Russia. We came from the tenements. Oi.
But I want to ask people, that scene with like, how many wontons do you want, right? How many wonton do you want? 5, 12, 10. I thought that was hilarious because it rang true to me. But I don't know, for people who are not Chinese, was that funny? Or was it just, a mother not agreeing with the daughter? That's kind of, because I think that's kind of an inside joke, I thought.
So my husband just piped in, May, that pushing food on your kid is very classic, mother-child or grandmother-child. And my husband's not Chinese, but from the time he spent with my mother, it was just constant, right? Mom was always, what do you want to eat when you come to visit? Right, and whatever dish she said, it would be there for dinner. And was there enough? And what did we want to take back with us? And it was always, whatever you said, she'd always try to double or, outdo it, right? It was just constant. So that's why I was a little puzzled when you said 10 is the right number, because with my mother, you'd have said 5 and she'd have said a dozen. And then she thought about it and it would turn into 2 dozen to make sure that you had enough. There would be no 10 is the right number. Maybe 8 would be the right number because of the Buddhist 8, but I don't know why 10 would be magical.
Well, actually, well, we should have let Sarah speak. She's got her hand up. But really quickly, to me, it is the reason 10 is the right number is because it's something about the way Chinese count. So I remember when I first came, one of the many things about America that puzzled me when I was, when I first came as a kid was why is 12 a thing? It's not, it's such an uneven number for me. Like 10, okay, you got 10 fingers. That's why you have 10. And you buy things, you get a package of 10. But what's with the 12? And then the baker's dozen really freaked me out. So I didn't get that at all. So I think 10 is something to do with just like, a kind of measurement. But Sarah, you should speak because you have your hand up.
There was a scene I remembered that I didn't quite get, and I was wondering if you were, probably a very simple explanation, but when she comes out of the airport and all these guys come up to her and like is that like taxi driver? I didn't understand what was going on there.
I thought they were drivers.
So they're trying to get her to pick their taxi?
Yeah, hustling for a fare, right? Just
All
like
right,
in New York.
Okay, I got that right. And then the other thing that I did think was interesting enough that you were talking about humor and that scene with the cat on the roof and how the father was trying to be funny, but they had guests. So he was trying to be funny to the guests, right? Not necessarily when nobody's home, maybe he's not going to be that funny because obviously it seems like he has some issues. My father is Portuguese and he does exactly the same thing. So when he's home alone, no jokes. It's all very serious. As soon as someone comes in to visit, it's all these jokes and and I'm wondering like if this is something that some of you have had this experience as well, or is this like it seems like Alan's family is not like that. They're always making jokes, but it's just like it was interesting because it's exactly the same thing that he does. So I don't know.
Well, I think it goes back to the points that people made earlier about, we all have an idealized view of what a family should be. And we have, so part of that ideal view could be that the father or the, patriarch, has responsibilities to entertain guests, but that may not really be what he feels like doing or how he is normally. But I think this idea that we all maintain and there's a lot of emotional labor that goes into holding up idea of what our families are, and we can never live up to those ideals, right? You never really know what goes on in somebody's family, but it's usually not the image that they want to project. And that's also, I think, very common among a lot of families, now certainly for Chinese, but probably for others too, is that, people say you don't air your dirty laundry in public, you don't talk about, difficult relationships in the family, what's in the family stays in the family. I mean, there's a lot of that too, of wanting to protect the reputation of the family to outsiders. I think those are universal issues, right? That's related to maintaining a view of the family that's not only for outsiders, but also for the family itself, right? To be able to get through, right? And even cope with the conflicts that people have, because many of those conflicts never get really resolved, right? That I think that's a kind of sad thing in many families where, Americans always say, if a parent is going to be is very ill and about to pass away, they want to make sure that you've settled things with your parent, right? That they don't die with a lot of your emotional baggage unattended to, right? And I think that's harder to do in some cultures than others. but I think that, as Anne said, the emotional labor that goes into maintaining our families, that is not actually about dealing with the real stuff, right? But that also helps us get through the real stuff as well.
Nancy, and I just want to say we should start wrapping up soon-ish, but if we have a few more questions, we can go for a few more minutes.
It was just a quick add to what May was saying about the families and reputation, and it just kind of picked up, mianzi, face,
Yeah,
is such a
exactly.
huge thing in Chinese culture. I mean, that truly is a big deal, and it's true in many Western families, but it's not necessarily consistent. There are plenty of people who would say more important that we keep the airways clear and we talk about things. Whereas in the Chinese family, if there was an outsider or even just within family, as you said, making everything look good, you don't want to lose face.
Right. You don't embarrass people.
Right.
Okay. May, if you want to, I'll give you the floor to say your final remarks on the film, and then Anne, if you want to say anything else about the series. But thank you so much, May, for running the show tonight. Thank you, Anne, for running the series for us. And we had a really nice group of participants today. We got a lot of different voices going. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. It was a nice discussion about a very powerful film. And I think I really enjoyed the discussion because it was about both kind of certain particularities in Chinese families, but also universal questions about family. So I think I learned a lot from that too. So thank you for having me. Thank you, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you, May. It's a real honor to have you with us. So thank you so much for your time. And it's so nice to see everyone's faces, even on Zoom. So I hope to see you at the next event in December. So thank you all. Thanks, May. Lovely to see you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Stay safe and stay
Thank you,
warm.
May.